neither
Just tell me
I care
Xiao.
about
Tell me
our
Xiao's
EV.
gonna be amazing. Xiao will be everything that you want him to be. He's going to solve world hunger, pay your rent, and make cat girls real. That's what Xiao's gonna do. No. See, Xiao is so powerful that when you buy him, he starts paying you money. But you gotta roll for him first. Is Ganyu gonna wait? Is he going to clean my house? Yeah. He'll clean your room, take out your trash. He'll do your homework for you. He'll write your thesis. No, see what Xiao will do? Xiao will cook you food every day, and he'll sit in the kitchen, naked, with nothing but an apron on. And when you come home, he'll say, "Gohan ni suru, ofuru ni suru, sore tomo watashi." I love it. He's a dragoon.
Okay, rewind real quick. There's a few things I want to point out about this trailer because they're normally pretty consistent with this. So, real quick.
Response for requests.
Yeah, this is where the fight starts,
to me.
basically. Pause after he hits things with his dash, his E. Like after he hits things with his dash. Oh, neat. Charge attack. Okay, so real quick. You can see he doesn't have his mask on, right? So his ult's not active, but he gets particles from dashing.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'll move forward to when he's in his ult. So he pops his ult, right, which is the mask thing. Alright, notice how he dashed there? And he dashed there? No particles. So this is in line with what we know about him from beta, and it seems like they chose not to change it, which is that just like Razor, he's very selfish. So his E during his ult does not generate particles. Presumably, we don't know for certain from the trailer, but if it's in line with, you know, the original pre-launch beta stuff that MiHoYo says it's okay to discuss and whatnot, his ult is likely also a selfish ult like Razor's, meaning you can't switch off of him without removing his ult. If this is the case, then a thing I want anyone who is in chat or anyone who is watching watching this VOD on YouTube later to keep in mind is that because Xiao is supposed to be a hyper selfish 5-star with very high damage ceiling, his personal damage numbers are going to be incredibly impressive. They should be. Like, by design of his kit, he should probably be the strongest when I'm on field, I do the most damage in the game unit. And I'm calling it. And I'm calling it right now. When Xiao comes out, every content creator who doesn't understand how team comps, team damage, all of these kinds of things, why selfishness is an issue, will be saying Xiao changes everything, new busted character, better than Venti, etc., right? And in a solo context, this may end up being true. He may be the individual strongest hyper carry unit in the game, assuming that, you know, with assumptions, of course, but based on the fact that he's selfish like this, he's a 5-star, he's a Nemo type, so he has to have higher base damage to compensate for lack of reactions and whatnot. And with what we understand about how his ult worked from the pre-launch beta, however, he's hyper selfish. So even if he's insane, his teams are going to suffer because of his selfishness. That's part of the issue with Razor, and why in the late game, when you have full invested teams and whatnot, Razor starts to fall behind more and more behind Kaching, because Razor's selfish. And when I say selfish, I don't mean Klee selfish, where Klee has to, like, you know, take field time for her ult and not switch off, because Klee can still make energy and particles for a teammate. In fact, her Ascension 4 makes energy for teammates with a charge attacks critting. Or with a spark attacks critting, or whatever the mechanic is. And so, like, the part of the reason Razor falls behind is because not only is he potentially wasting team cooldowns that could be dealing burst chunks of damage or enabling, because he can't switch off, but more importantly, he doesn't generate energy with his E during his ult. Razor doesn't make particles, so his team suffers for that.
Right, so
Xiao's
it's a lot like Noelle, where you have a Noelle carry.
Yeah.
Her teams suffer because she's not generating energy to the team's pool of energy. So people have to...
I also saw... Yeah, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
I was going to say, so, you know, it's... In late game swap comps, sometimes you don't even absorb energy on the character that you're on just because so much energy is created.
Yeah, it's not worth the field time.
Right, it's not worth the field time.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, but with a Noelle team, if you want somebody to have an ult, you kind of have to absorb on them. Like if I want my Kaya to have his ult ready, I need to absorb on
Unless
Kaya.
you build more ER, which,
Or yeah,
it's
unless
why-
I
it's
compensate
why
for
swap
damage,
teams run,
lose
like,
damage by building more ER.
It's why like pure swap comps tend to run like 160 to 180 ER per person minimum as like a baseline, just because like that allows them to not have to take the field time, so you can keep rotating cooldowns more efficiently. But so like that's just the thing I want everyone to keep in mind, right? With Xiao, is that when he comes out, I'm already calling it. Every content creator, every streamer and whatnot is gonna be like, oh my god, he's so busted. This guy is insane. Pull for him, and he should be by his design the strongest solo unit when he's on field. But his teams are going to suffer, and that's the thing to keep in mind. I'm not saying Zhao is going to be bad or anything. Just keep in mind that the solo when you're running there's a joke I've been making that with a character as selfish as Xiao, people are going to be doing like solo clears of Abyss with him, like 9 stars, and everyone's going to be like, oh my god, look how powerful he is. He can solo clear 9 stars so easily. Not realizing that most Xiao teams are probably going to basically be Xiao solos anyway.
Right.
And like, if Xiao is as selfish as we think he is, and he does function similar to Razor, but unlike Razor, he's going to have such a high personal damage to make up for it, then we're going to have this really interesting thing. We're going to have to do a lot of testing, calculations, and everything to figure out with Xiao, which is, what is better? Do you make his ults hit harder by running transferable damage with his ults and, you know, stacking up a bunch of ults with his ult to make his ult hit harder? Or do you run more batteries and run more Anemo units in your team so he gets another ult faster? Which is better? And that's an interesting question. We're going to have to put a lot of time and testing and whatnot into figuring out which one is markedly better, if they even are markedly better, or they're just different play styles.
What I assume
like,
I'm going to do.
Yeah.
What I assume that the team I'm going to try to run initially,
like, Quad Anemo might not be a meme, we don't know yet.
will the team I want to run initially is going to be Jean, Xiao, and Fischl. Because assuming that his attacks are swirling, he should do something similar to that Sucrose comp, where he's making the A4s happen, which is going to generate more energy for him during his ult. Which is
A4s don't generate energy on swirl reactions.
They don't generate. Oh shit.
No.
Okay.
It's only on like superconducts and overloads and shit like that.
Well, then I was also thinking about putting him with Xingqiu. Is what I was thinking for the whole comp.
So yeah, and Xingqiu could line up better because Xingqiu with enough ER on a sack sword is able to self-fund his ult, and his cooldowns are only 20 seconds anyway, and there's no way Zhao's cooldown's longer than 20 seconds. We don't know what it is, but unless they break, you know, current design philosophies, he's not going to have more than a 20-second cooldown on his ult. So Xingqiu may work nicely there in terms of having his ult up every time, but he's not going to be doing anything for Xiao. And like, the question we're going to come into is if Xiao is individually powerful enough, right? Like, if he is truly this hyper carry, when I'm on field my ult, I murder everything better than anything else can. The question goes, okay, so do I run like Xingqiu and Fischl with him to like have stronger ults? Or do I just run like 2 to 3 Anemo supports just so his ult comes back quicker?
Right.
Because the question is which one is more worth it, and that's something we'll have to do a lot of testing and a lot of team damage calculations. That's why I was saying Xiao seems really interesting to me, and he's gonna be a really interesting character to like test the math out, because his selfishness makes his team damage questions and how you how you compromise for his selfishness and his fallbacks a very interesting puzzle to fix to solve, right? Like,
no, I would. God, that'd suck if it was like, yeah, just run quad Anemo because you just swap to everybody, pop their E's real quick, and then swap back to Xiao, and Xiao should have his ult up, and then you just do that, and then keep rotating.
Yeah,
that'd
and
be
like
a little boring.
I want to be clear that there is a difference between a unit being good when choosing to be selfish, or as selfish as possible, like Ganyu or Keqing or Diluc, and a unit being actually selfish. Because like Ganyu, like we just said in the most recent video, Ganyu likes to be selfish. The more charge attack she can pump out with her insane charge attack DPS, the better, generally speaking, as long as you're not wasting important cooldowns and rotations on your supports, right? But she doesn't have to be. If you have a Kaya or a Jean with a Ganyu, you can still switch off of her every 6 seconds to pop their abilities, to generate their ults, to generate your teammates' ults, and to do that big burst of like, I'm on field for 1 second and do a giant chunk of damage rotations, right?
Right.
Razor and Klieg, and probably also Xiao, can't do this. but also Razor but like Klee is selfish because she doesn't want to swap off because of her ults, disappearing. But like I would say that Razor and Xiao, based on this footage, are going to be hyper selfish because they can't generate any energy. So if we assume, I don't know, maybe let's say the duration is 10 seconds or 15 seconds. For that 10 or 15 seconds that you choose to stay on Xiao, the only energy your teammates are getting are either if you have a Fischl turret or an Alfredo turret, or from enemies losing health and getting particles that way. Xiao literally isn't making particles for his team during those 10 to 15 seconds, which is a massive energy deficit for your team. So even if you build ER to compensate for that and you run a Fischl to help have some energy gen at least during that period of time and whatnot, you're still sacrificing your team's damage output because of these energy issues that Xiao is creating for his team.
Well, I mean, if you ran something like Jean with a Fab sword, Xingqiu with a sack sword. Xingqiu with a sack sword self-funds himself. Jean with a Fab sword is going to create energy for not only Xiao, but also for everybody else. And then you run like, I don't know, Shang Ling with a Fav lance, or like Zhang Li with a Fab lance or something like that. You probably want to have like 2 Fab weapons, I think, on that team.
Yeah, and like the thing you have to keep in mind too, guys, of Fav and sack weapons only proc when the unit is on the field. So Fischl having a Fav bow doesn't work unless a crit from Fischl's Oz or herself happens while Fish is still on field. Like Fish as a turret when Xiao or anyone else is on field does not trigger Fav lance even with crits. Or Fav bow, sorry, even with crits. Same with sack bow. That's why, and like the other issue is like what Tune is describing would be a comp where you're kind of going for biggest damage Xiao ults, right? Like you're layering transferable damage, making sure that the transferable damage is up when Xiao is ulting.
Right.
But then the question is, how the hell does Xiao get his ult back up?
Right.
Like, do you save your E's for only after you're ulting so you can gen some energy for yourself? Because like Jean is a good energy generator. Jean and Venti are both good energy generators, but that's because of frequency, not because of like dump of particles, right? Like the reason why Venti is a good energy generator with his E is because he can get 3 particles every 6 seconds, but you can't swap to him every 6 seconds with Xiao up.
Right.
So instead, what ends up happening is Xiao comes out of ult, you switch to Jean and Venti, you get 2 or 3 particles, and you have to wait another 6 seconds to get another 2 or 3, and you're not getting like a burst dump because you can't do that consistent energy gen they normally deal. That's why I do want to test like a sack fragments sucrose with Xiao, because sack frag sucrose can dump 8 particles for him instantly after his ult. And if you have a high enough refined sack frags, then it's possible that the passive will be up every time Xiao comes out. Every time Xiao comes out of ult, meaning that she can just dump particles into him to refresh him. Jean, while we'll have, of course, synergy with him because
you're consolidating the healer.
And you're consolidating healer, which is valuable. And with how much he's moving around and like the knockbacks we're seeing on his kit, it's possible Bennett might not be super reasonable to play with him, right? Like it might be hard to keep enemies in Bennett's circle with the amount of mobility and knockbacks we're seeing in this trailer. So we'll see. Like that'll have to come down to testing. So Jean might be best in slot choice for healer for him for that reason.
Well, I mean, I was even talking about like running, unfortunately, running, because I hate the sack sword. I hate the way it looks. I hate the way the sack weapons look. But I was even talking about maybe running like a sack sword on Jean.
Yeah.
For double E.
And again, guys, this is us trying to discuss it based on what we are seeing is like basically what we're seeing in the trailer, right? As well as stuff from the pre-launch beta. We aren't discussing any of the like data mine stuff or the leak stuff because we don't want to discuss that kind of stuff. Not only does Mihoyo not want us to, but like none of that's final. We don't want to do any kind of speculation based off of that stuff. But based off of what Mihoyo said is okay to talk about, which is the pre-launch beta info about Xiao and the stuff we're seeing in this trailer, it does strike me that he is likely going to be this hyper selfish carry that's going to pose this interesting question. Do you focus on getting Xiao ult more quickly so he can just keep ulting and doing huge damage, or do you make each of his ults do bigger chunks of damage by layering transferable damage on him?
I guess it depends on how much damage you have, because if you have enough damage to clear content quickly, like you could speedrun it, then obviously the bigger one would probably be more desirable, because then you can just like clear it and you don't need a second ult.
Yeah, you don't need a second ult. But then,
and I guess it depends on how long the duration of the ult is, how.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things like if you're doing 1 round wipes, then the most important thing is to make sure that 1 round is killing things as fast as possible, right? And hits the thresholds. But for most of us, unless Xiao is like obscenely massively overtuned, he will like a 1 round wipe on harder late game content won't be feasible for most players.
Right.
And so the question then becomes like, well, is Xiao's personal damage worth dropping support damage, and should I just run 2 or 3 Anemo supports with him to get his ult up because his personal damage is worth it? Or is his personal damage good but not worth it enough that I should be running Xingqiu and Fischl and all this shit with him, right? So that he can have the more powerful, slower rotation ults.
And that's really the question, because if you put a Sucrose on that team, she's basically doing nothing but being a battery for... Because she's not doing damage. Like, let's be real.
Like, she's not and like the EM boost she's giving him isn't going to help that much Swirl's low damage output.
Right.
So like, yeah, and it just comes down to like, that's just things I wanted to preface now that we've seen some official info on like how Xiao is going to look on release. And based off of that and like pre-launch CBT stuff, I just wanted to discuss these things because I know this is going to be a big issue in the content creator community, that everyone's going to see how big his personal damage is. And for people who don't think about or know about or don't like look into, you know, team outputs and how you, because in the end game, your team output is what matters. That's why Razor falls off. He hurts his team even if he's individually doing a lot for a 4-star. And so like your team outputs matter, but for people who don't look at it from that perspective, they'll just see Xiao's big numbers and be like, he's the new most broken character in the game. Everyone pull for him, and he might not be a good choice, because if he is this hyper invested, hyper selfish carry, you have to hyper invest in him. He's not gonna work well because of his selfishness as a cheaper unit. You're gonna have to get into Ascension 5, Ascension 6, Talent 8, Talent 10, whatever. You're gonna have to get him an 80 or 90 weapon. You're gonna have to get him a plus 20 set. Like, you're going to have to hyper invest in him because he's carrying the entire team on his back if this is how his playstyle ends up being, which is what I think it will be.
Okay, we've been on this for like 10, 15.
Anyway,
so.
point is, that's the Xiao stuff. All right, go on. Kit definitely looks cool. It looks fun as hell to play. I'm excited to play him.
Yeah, I'm a big Dragoon fan.